Hi, welcome to this week's episode of the Mojo Moment, brought to you by Marketing Mojo, marketects who build for brands at the intersection of purpose and profit, where good business happens. I'm Lisa Bowman, the Chief Mojo Officer of Marketing Mojo, and today's guest is Abby Schreiber. Abby's had a long background in journalism. She was most recently the editor of Paper Magazine. We're going to have some fun talking about the edition that tried to break the internet with Kim K's butt. We're going to dish on pizza since we're both from Chicago, talk about the media landscape that's taking place in the current environment, and of course, dig into Abby's Mojo Moment. Abby, welcome to the Mojo Moment.
Thanks so much for having me, Lisa.
Super excited to chat with you today. You have been an editor of Paper. I would be remiss if I did not kick us off with this, right? So I don't want to embarrass you, but that was the magazine that tried to break the internet with this, right? The picture of Kim K's butt. Talk to me about this. What was behind this?
So at the time, I was one of the digital editors. So this was an earlier stage of my career. And I remember our creative director at the time had wanted to put Kim Kardashian on Paper's 30th anniversary issue, which also coincided with our big September fashion issue. And the owner at the time did not want Kim to represent the 30th anniversary of Paper because she'd never had a cover before, and the owner felt like we should have it be someone who really encapsulated more the legacy of Paper. So anyway, that idea was scrapped. But then fast forward a couple months, the same creative director thought, you know what if we had a cover with Kim that was dedicated to the power of her brand and social media. And then he had this light bulb go off in his head and he said, you know what, if Kim Kardashian was on the cover of Paper, it would break the internet. And just like that, we realized it was a great tagline. So we talked to her team. She was on board. The shoot happened in Paris during Paris Fashion Week. And funny enough, originally it was not planned for her to do any naked photos. We never asked her to shoot nude. The plan was actually to have the photographer, who was this French photographer, Jean-Paul Goude, who's known for his work, especially in the 80s, shooting stars like Grace Jones, among others, recreate one of his old images and do sort of an homage to his own work. And so the plan was to have Kim wearing this sparkly strapless gown with a bottle of champagne that was popped, and the bubbles would go into her champagne glass on her butt. And that actually is the other cover that launched with the one we saw. But at some point during the shoot, Kim was just having so much fun. She just said, you know, I kind of want to do some nude photos. And we said, why not? And so we ended up having two great covers that broke the internet. And, you know, the internet and the world, at least as far as that lexicon goes, was never the same.
Yeah, I can tell you, I don't know about that, but I do not have it in me to ever do a nude photo shoot. I can
Yeah,
guarantee you it is not happening in my lifetime.
no, nor mine, nor mine.
So you had an opportunity to interview and produce content for some really cool people. I remember reading your bio, and you did some work with Colin Kaepernick. Um, you know, that right now with everything that's going on, so relevant. Anything you can share from that interview or when that was?
Sure. So I didn't interview him myself, but Colin actually came on board a year ago for our September issue again. And he was not only on the cover, but he actually played a much bigger role than most talent would. And he was a guest editor. And so we worked really closely with Colin and his team. I mean, he was coming to the Paper offices. We were in meetings all the time. And we put together this really incredible portfolio of civil rights leaders, visionaries, and advocates who embodied this 10-point pillar program that Colin has launched called Know Your Rights. And that's all in support of Black Lives Matter and, you know, ending police brutality and all of the work Colin has stood for. And so we worked with him and set up all these shoots with the likes of Angela Davis, Tarana Burke, who started Me Too, Brian Stevenson, the famed civil rights lawyer, the exonerated five, the men who were exonerated from the Central Park 5 case, and others. And it was a really remarkable, meaningful moment in my career that I feel really fortunate to have gotten to have.
I'm sure it's a proud moment. Like I said, it's so topical and relevant. This is the week that we've had yet another shooting of somebody in Kenosha, and just the calls for change and the push for social reform. The NBA boycotting playing games last night to stand with the family of Jacob Blake, and it just, like, as I think about the media landscape, um, and even the fact that we're just coming off of the DNC, we've had the RNC that just aired, and such, not to get into the political conversation, but such a dichotomy in the coverage and how things are presented. And so from a media perspective, I'd love to hear from you on, you've got the same story, right? Facts are facts. This is what's happening. We're all watching it live. We're seeing the same thing. Yet, depending on what channel you're watching or who you're listening to, the story is presented in a completely different way. And I think what's occurred to me as I've watched this is, it's like I'll watch one coverage on one channel of an event that I saw live, and I have my perception of what happened, what was said, how it was intended. And I'll see one channel cover it, and I'm like, yes, that's what I saw. That's what makes sense. Then I turn the channel, and I'm like, are they even reporting on the same event that I just saw? Because the story is so radically different, and they're coming at it from such a different perspective. And so we're in this era now where everything is fake news and the liberal media and this, that, and the other. So would love to hear your take on some of that and just this environment that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really distinct time in the media world. And I've seen in the course of my career the effects of a lot of different phenomena. And of course, having spent the majority of my career at Paper, an independently owned and published magazine and site, I was in a very specific niche in the media world, but nevertheless, I think we were impacted in some ways just like anyone else. So I think on the one hand, you have this almost arms race for viewership and market share driven by the cable news networks. And I think, not to get too far back in history, right, but you have the launch of Fox News in the 90s and having them come out with a really partisan, conservative viewpoint. And in their minds, it was to be a balance for what they perceived to be the liberal bias or viewpoint of many other mainstream newspapers or cable networks. But then all of a sudden, Fox sees their proof of concept working and sees themselves getting bigger and bigger market shares of viewers who want more opinionated journalism. So then you have other networks and other outlets feel like they have to compete by swinging the pendulum in the opposite direction. And so to an extent, that also has trickled down into other types of media, digital media, print media, where suddenly many journalists and editors realize the stories that seem to get the most traction are the ones that have a much more specific point of view on a topic. And even in digital media that is in many ways apolitical, you see the proliferation of sort of the hot take, right? Where it's not just straightforward reporting the, 5 W's, the who, what, where, why, what happened. It's some journalist's opinion of what happened or analysis of what happened. So you see that gaining force at the same time as so many media businesses, especially print and digital, are struggling for revenue because advertising is going away from especially newspapers and magazines, and digital media is still struggling to be profitable because they're competing with Google and Facebook. So in this kind of hamster wheel cycle, all of these digital platforms are trying to find any way they can to juice up their traffic. And one of the ways that has so far proven to be effective is this more pointed, opinionated coverage of a topic, whether it's a hot take or an op-ed, a personal essay, or something that is not fully objective. And I don't know if that's just going to keep happening for the rest of our life or if eventually things will reset. What do you think?
It's interesting because we didn't really talk about this a lot during the first conversations that we had, but I actually started off undergrad as a journalism major. My grand plan was to get my undergrad in journalism and go to law school. I wanted to report on like really high profile legal cases, things like maybe the impeachment hearing or back in the day, the O.J. Simpson trial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things like that. And so, I jokingly talk about the fact that the Mojo Moment is my way of indulging that inner journalist, right? I get to interview cool people and talk about interesting things. But I got to be honest, I'm kind of struggling with it a little bit because I feel like the role of the media is to present the story and tell the facts and allow the audience to make their decision based on the facts that are presented. But it seems to me that the facts are so varied. Again, not to put a date stamp on this, but I watched the DNC, I've watched most of the RNC, not all of it, because I just really was interested in hearing both perspectives, even though I have a definite alignment towards one side. That we won't get into to make this apolitical, but the coverage on it is just so different. I'm watching it, I hear what was said, you hear the tone, and certainly tone is open to interpretation, right? So you see the physical delivery of something, and I'll go there, right? Kimberly Guilfoyle the other night. To me, it was a woman that was standing up there screaming, and just the volume and the screaming, and so that's what got covered in the media, right? There wasn't a lot about the message. It was about how she as a woman presented herself.
Yeah.
And I'll leave my personal opinion as to the content of what she had to say to the side, but is that really what we should be talking about? Or should it be like, here's what she said, and agree, disagree, fact, not fact. So it's really been interesting to watch the difference in not only the coverage and the perspective of the two political conventions, but also just from a production perspective to me, how they're going about it. Because it's so, like everything else, so diametrically opposed right now, right? You had the Democrats wearing masks, socially distanced, the Republicans mingling with the people and no masks. And it just like further serves up that divide to me. And again, without getting on the political spectrum, like my hope for our country is that we get to November and we find some reconciliation, some way of coming back together as a country, because we're just too divided right now. There's too much going on and people are suffering. And we need to remember that, the only race we need to win is the human one. And we all need to come together. So I know that was kind of a long answer to your question.
No, well said. And just sort of one follow-up, because you mentioned this. I think what a lot of people maybe aren't aware of or don't realize, or maybe subconsciously notice it, but don't always put it into words, is a bias or a perspective in media is not just how someone is covering an event, but it's what they're covering. So it's to what you said about the Kimberly Guilfoyle speech. It's not just the language they're using when they're talking about it, but what are they even talking about in the first place? And so that's another way that media companies are both getting market share, but also kind of finding their camps, for better or for worse, by the stories they even think are newsworthy.
Yeah,
and it's not a problem.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to something you said too about sort of print going away. I think we're all like digital transformation, right? We grab everything digitally today. It's the first thing I do. This morning I was up at 4:00. What did I do? I grabbed my phone, looked at CNN, scrolled through all of my feeds on social to see what was happening. That's how we absorb it. But I have to tell you on a personal level, like I love print. Call me old school, but for me on a Saturday to like grab my stack of magazines and chill with some brain candy, like that's what I miss. And I'm seeing that my magazines, because advertising revenue is declining, my magazines are getting thinner and thinner. There's no more samples on card. I'm missing my old school magazines. I don't get the same thing. out of digital content necessarily
I
that I did
know.
on paper.
I agree. I mean, that's why I felt very lucky at a certain point at paper when I had the chance to move from the digital team to the print side, which is sort of the reverse migration most journalists are finding themselves making. But there is something so satisfying, both as a reader and as an editor, of having a really cohesive, physical, tangible thing that's a product of your hard work that you can hold and look at and keep.
Yeah, it's nice to have that quality piece. And I'll share a little personal weirdness with you. People Magazine, right, which is like my brain candy on the weekends. For whatever reason, I read it backwards. I always start from the back and read towards the front, and I don't know why. But I always start with that profile piece that they've got in the back that digs into somebody, and then I finish with like the star tracks and the news about what people are doing. So yeah, it's just my own weird way of reading it. But yeah, I'm a print girl. I want to switch the conversation just a little bit. We talked about your mojo moment. I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit, and I can relate to it because I know what it is. But I'd love for you to talk about it and share with me again what it was and how that moment for you has shaped your approach to life, to business, to taking on challenges, adulting, um, all of that. So let's dig into your mojo moment just a little bit.
Sure. So my mojo moment actually happened probably the first time I was driving on Lakeshore Drive, which obviously as a fellow Chicagoan, you know that. And for those who aren't familiar with Chicago, Lakeshore Drive, it's not a highway, but it's almost a junior highway. There's no stoplights. Cars are traveling at a much higher speed than they would at a normal city street, but not as fast as you would on the freeway. And I remember literally day one in driver's ed class, the instructor told me to get on the drive and I was just white knuckling it. I mean, I was like, no, you can't have me do this. I'm not ready. And somehow I managed okay, didn't get into any accidents. The driver told me to take an exit and, I wiped a sigh of relief off my face. And at a certain point, I realized, oh man, I really want to drive and get my driver's license like many teenagers do. I want that independence, but this is going to be really hard if each time I get in a car, I'm paranoid that I'm going to get in a fatal accident. And of course, the more I practiced, the more I learned, the better of a driver I became. And slowly but surely, the more confident I became. But it was really this light bulb moment that happened at some point in this process when I looked around and I saw all the other cars on the road. And I said, you know what? I have the fundamentals down. This was probably towards the end of my driving lessons. I'm a decent driver, and I'm probably just as good as 90% of these other people on the road. I mean, they're not overly intellectualizing their driving. And in fact, because I'm self aware about my strengths and weaknesses, and I'm especially then a super defensive driver, probably even better than a lot of these people who are reckless, who are, texting and drinking their coffee and fiddling with the radio or the air conditioning. And that was one of those weird, almost paradigm shifts, as psychologists call it, where suddenly I felt like, I can do this. And so many people are going through life, frankly, improvising. And I shouldn't feel like I'm less capable than anyone. And so taking this sentiment and distilling it down into the simplest way to describe it, it was this moment where I looked around and I said, why not me? Why can't I be a good driver? Why can't I get on this scary highway and be fine? Why not? Who says that I'm incapable of this or that I'm worse than anyone else out there doing this thing? And that was a lesson that served me really well, especially as I got older and went to college and started my career and had to fight feelings that so many of us have with imposter syndrome, which I think especially as women can affect us a lot because there aren't always role models in certain industries or upper tier positions, unfortunately. And of course, I hope that continues to change. But this notion that I'm just as capable as anyone has really stuck with me and given me courage in a lot of instances to take on projects or ideas that I might otherwise have found to be super intimidating or impossible. And that's not to say every project or idea happened or came to fruition, but at least having the sort of guts to go for it has been something that I've really been trying to do probably ever since having that mojo moment back then.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. Like Lakeshore Drive is the scariest place to drive when you're a new driver, right? And you've got cars whizzing all around. There's not really exits like a traditional highway, to your point, no stoplights. And you have the lake on one side, which is distracting depending on which way you're driving, right? If you're headed north, you've got the lake off to your right, which you're looking at because it's beautiful scenery. But yeah, it is completely scary. And I will tell you that having grown up in Chicago and learned to drive in Chicago, the one thing I still can't do, and I know you're in New York, so you probably do this and do it well, I can't parallel park. It scares me and I can't do it. So like I will drive around the block 15 times till I can find an end parking slot that I can ride into, but I cannot parallel park.
Well, honestly, I'm probably a very rusty parallel parker because I rarely ever drive in New York City. I feel like the only times I ever drive anymore are when I'm either visiting people in Chicago or more frequently when I would go to LA. Can you imagine the old times back when I was taking business trips when I would go to California and usually rent a car? But in New York, I almost never drive.
I've only driven in New York twice, and I will tell you that both of those were two of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Part of the reason I love coming to New York is because A, you can walk everywhere, and if you can't, you hop in a cab or an Uber, or you get on the subway, and you get where you need to go. I actually really don't like driving very much.
I like driving, but that might also be because I live here and don't get to do it. And so when I am somewhere and I'm driving, I feel the sense of freedom or possibility that I don't always get when I'm crammed into the subway in New York City. But grass is always greener, I guess.
I guess because living in Atlanta, you essentially can't go anywhere here without getting in a car. So yeah, I guess the grass is always greener. Let's spend our last couple minutes talking about you're not with paper anymore. What is it that you want to do next? What's next on the plan?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of an open question, and I'll preface by saying this: it's definitely an interesting time to be in a career transition for many reasons, but I'm finding it hard to make long-term plans in light, of course, of what's happening with the pandemic and the economy and so many other situations that our country and of course also the world is experiencing. But I will say, and to sort of echo you, not to date this conversation too much, but I am hoping to spend the next few months getting involved in election related efforts, especially when it comes to things like voting. We're living in such a transition turning point moment, and without revealing too much of my own political viewpoints or making this a political conversation, I think we can all hopefully agree that it has never been a more important time to vote. And it's a little alarming, all of the ways we keep hearing or reading about that our votes could be imperiled. And so I'm hoping to take this time in whatever way I can, however I can, wherever I can, to dive into projects like that hopefully not only do something good, but also brings a sense of purpose to my work. And then at the end of the year, we'll see. Maybe go back to media, maybe do some freelancing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, like you said, to be in transition because I'm very much the same way, right? It's a little bit of an open book, and I'm trying not to be too prescriptive about necessarily what's next, but just sort of letting the ebb and flow of the world right now shape it a little bit. And I've been very fortunate in that I've been able to find a purpose and lean in on some things that I didn't have the ability to do before. And so that for me has really been a lot of fun, and I've met some very cool people along the way. So as we wrap it up, couple of rapid fire last minute questions for you. During the last couple months with quarantine, what have you been binging on Netflix or Hulu?
Oh my gosh, so much. I binged through all of Killing Eve because I'd never watched it, but started it and finished up until the most recent season ended. I've been binging this great show on HBO called I May Destroy You that I highly recommend for those who have not seen it yet. Tiger King, of course, which feels like, doesn't that feel like a million years ago
It
when
does.
people were talking and watching Tiger King? Um, those are probably the three that stand out, but I've gotten through so many series on Netflix, Hulu. Oh, Normal People was great. Um, it's almost embarrassing the amount of TV I've been watching, which I don't normally watch that much TV.
Yeah, I've definitely consumed a lot more too. What have you been binge eating during quarantine?
Ooh, I would say now that it's quite hot in New York, I've been definitely eating a lot more ice cream. My go-to snack these days, I'm pretty addicted to these crackers. Do you know those crackers, the diamond nut thins? I forget what they're called. They're rice and nut crackers, and they're just, I don't know, they're addictive, and I think of them as being healthier because they're not bread, gluten crackers, but they probably aren't. They probably have a lot of salt, but they're delicious and even better with cheese. So yeah, I'm a big dairy. Maybe it's my Midwest. I love my cheese. I love my ice cream. So those are probably what I've been binging.
Yeah, another maybe separated at birth moment for us with the cheese too. My absolute favorite go-to snack of all times, cheese and chocolate. And then final question before we bring this to a close is when things open back up again, when we can all travel safely and comfortably, where's the first place that you want to go?
Ooh, great question. And it's funny, one I've been thinking a lot about, but I don't know if I have really nailed down an answer. But I would say I've been dying for many years to go to Colombia. And so I'd like to go there or travel around South America. So that's probably at the top of my list.
Cool. Well, I am hopeful for both of our sakes that we will come out of this, that you'll be able to take that trip, and that you will either send a fabulous postcard or we will be in a position to finally sit down over a cup of Starbucks face to face, and you'll be able to tell me all about that trip. I'm living for that day and taking things that we took for granted, right, just a short time ago, the ability to sit down face to face with somebody over coffee. Now seems like such a distant memory some days. So just looking forward to getting back to normal just a little bit. Abby, I have enjoyed the conversation with you so much today. I'm looking forward to us continuing to talk. Thank you for sharing your Mojo moment, and I will look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you. I've enjoyed
Thanks.
our
Take
conversation too.
care.
Bye.